Hi, this is Travis Shaw with the Mosby Heritage Area Association coming to you with another one of our Ask a Historian segments. And in this case, it wasn't a question from the public, but it was actually a question from the staff at the Mosby Heritage Area that started this. If you remember last week, we talked about spiritualism and seances during our History on Tap program. And one of our longtime friends, Alison Herring, mentioned that she knew of a seance that took place in Leesburg in the 19th century. So we figured it'd be fun to get the details on that and to find out a little bit more about the family in question. So Alison, thank you so much for joining me today. It's always good to see you.
Thank you so much. This is going to be a lot of fun. So I really enjoyed the event last week, and I did comment during the event that, they did have a seance in Loudoun County. Now, the people that are involved are from Leesburg, but this actually happened at Langolan in southwestern Loudoun County. So we've got pieces of both. And so what's fun is last week you all went over the broader movement of mesmerism and spiritualism. And this is going to be an example of, okay, how's that playing out at home in somebody's living room? We learned from a few weeks even earlier about the parlor games that people were playing, the kissing that was going on. But so this was also playing out in people's homes this way, and the Powells leave us a really fun example. So it's from a letter from Hattie Powell, who we got to know if you watched the kissing party one that we did. I think the title of that one was Scandals.
Historic Scandals.
Yeah.
Yes, that was another History on Tap program from, over a month ago now.
April 1st or 2nd. Yeah. Like that first week of April. So I recommend that. So we met her there. And so luckily this letter is from Hattie because she does such a delightful job of giving us a lot of rich detail from what she's describing. And the letter is dated October 3rd, because we know the exact night this seance went down. It was October 3rd, 1853. And her family have moved to Illinois, but they were from southwestern Loudoun County, and Langolan was a Powell estate. It had been owned by Cuthbert Powell and his wife, Catherine Sims Powell. But he died in 1849, and the estate sold to Dr. Joseph Glass Gray. And Hattie's come back from Illinois, and she's visiting. So yay, she gets to go to Grandma and Grandpa's house and see some old friends of hers and hang out and have a seance. But she doesn't call it a seance. I guess I use that word because we don't call them table movings anymore. And if I just say table movings, you think I'm moving furniture around my house, like I'm redecorating the dining room. So she calls it table movings. And it was a thing. And all of the accounts that I found of this when I was doing my research date to 1853, which is really interesting. That, it makes me wonder, were they reading some of these journals and magazines that had articles coming out about this? And then were then interpreting this in their own living room. So the way a table moving worked, we had 6 people at this party, and I'll go over them in a moment. And they stood in a circle around a round table in the middle of the room. And there was a couple of variations on this. Sometimes they would hold hands, and then they would put their held hands down on the table around in a circle. Other times they would have their fingers spread and then would put their hands down on the table, and perhaps their pinkies would touch the partner next to them. And I've almost wondered if the pinky touching or the holding of hands was maybe like a control mechanism, like you're not just moving this table yourself, right? Like it might have been them trying to have some accountability with this. So then what would happen is they would ask a question, and then the table movement would answer the question. So they might, if they asked a question with numbers, somebody might count 1, 2, 3, and then the table might move on 3, so the answer becomes 3.
So this is kind of like a Ouija board, just on a big scale,
Yeah, and it takes a lot longer, because if you're doing the alphabet, you'd have to go A, B, C, but if the word you're looking for starts with Z, you're going to be playing this game for a while. So the Ouija board, I think, probably sped that up a little bit. Somebody was like, this is taking too long. We need to come up with a better idea. And the Ouija board, I think, is the late 19th century. So this is a precursor.
Yeah, like 1890s or so.
Yeah. So they're playing, so they're all holding hands, or they've got their hands down on the table, and they ask of it a pretty mundane question. So I think somebody who has orchestrated this is using this to prove that what's happening is accurate. So they asked, well, how many tumblers are there on the sideboard? So pretty bland question. And you wonder, is there drama when they ask the question, or was it just, well, how many tumblers are there on the sideboard, or did they use their voices to inflect the drama? So we don't know what the answer was, but the table came back with some number like 12. So then off they have to send somebody, okay, go over to the sideboard and go count how many tumblers. So they go over there and they count them up, and there's 12, and everybody's like, oh, Well, clearly, and Hattie emphasizes nobody knew how many tumblers were on the sideboard, which yes, somebody did. So of our 6, we've got a suspect who has like orchestrated this whole thing and like counted them up the night before or the morning of. Well, it's such a bland question, but don't you think that they're probably using this to be like, see, the table said there were 12 and now there's 12. So clearly whatever's happening here is the spirit, like the spirit, no. But she keeps emphasizing nobody knew how many were on the sideboard. So the people that are at this, I've mentioned Hattie, she's 20 years old at this point. We've got 2 sisters. So I mentioned the house now, Llangollen is owned by Dr. Joseph Glass-Gray, and 2 of his daughters are participating. His oldest is Lucy Gray, she's 18, and they all call her Lute. So for those who don't know, in the 19th century, if your name is Lucy and you're young, they are going to call you Lute. That is your nickname, Lute. Very, very common. And her little sister, Minnie, who's 8 years old, which is really cute. That little 8-year-old is participating in the table movings. We have 2 sisters. And then we have an aunt and an uncle, Uncle William Hill Gray of Leesburg. So that name should be familiar to the history buffs of Leesburg. He was the mayor of Leesburg. He was an attorney. He lived in Leesburg a long time. He had a home just north of Leesburg called Locust Hill that's still there. Yep. And Joseph Glass-Gray is his brother. So he has come to visit. Hattie was likely staying with him, and so she has called shotgun on that carriage and has come to visit them. And they have an aunt that's with them, a Miss Lucy Elsie. And this family's enduring a tragedy right now. And this may be why they may be interested in this spiritual realm. Their mama has died. So little Minnie, who's 8 years old, and her older sister, Lute, have lost their mother. That was Mary Eliza Elsie. And she died about 3 months earlier in July of 1853, leaving Dr. Joseph Glass-Gray with 6 children. And there was a younger child who was 5 years old at the time. So between 5 and 18 is the range. And so I think Uncle William Hill Gray has come to visit his brother to help them through this grief. And then the woman who's died, her sister, has come to help. So recapping, we have 2 sisters, we have an aunt and an uncle to make 4, and then we have 2 guests. One of them is Hattie, and the other one is a mystery man named Prestwood McCreary. I have not been able to find that name. He's clearly visiting with his mother based on the context of the letter. So there's a Mrs. McCreary who's in the house who's not participating in this. And looking at the census records, McCreary does come up, but I can't find a Prestwood, so he remains a mystery to me. So we've got 6 people all participating in this, and then we've got a mother that has died, and so I think that's probably why they're not playing the measuring tape, kiss the candlestick type games that we heard about.
Something a little more somber,
A little more somber, a little bit more appropriate to the moment. And Miss Lucy Elsie also lived in Leesburg, so probably as William Hill Gray is driving his carriage out towards Llangollen, he stops and picks up Lucy. So the 3 of them haul out to Llangollen for this party. And they would have stayed several days. And Hattie identifies 3 of them play the role of the medium. So she plays medium, Uncle William does, and Lute. But she doesn't really signify what that means. But what I can piece together is probably those are the 3 that are asking the questions of the table and then interpreting the answers from the table, perhaps, while everybody else is just plain participating. But that's interesting that she was identifying who were playing the mediums. Okay. So the next question that they asked of the table, because she says it, she doesn't say they as in the spirit realm, she says it as in the table. She said they asked, well, how old would Hattie, somebody did, how old will Hattie Powell be when she gets married? It's such a typical question in these, like, doesn't that sound like one?
Yeah, sure.
Well, like, it almost sounds like the game Light of the Feathers to the board. I'll play this game, your wife did. If you mention this to her, every girl played this at a slumber party growing up. But anyways, it's
sorry, I lost you there for a second.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, now I can hear you. Yep.
How far back do I need to go?
All right. What you just said.
so the question that was being asked, so somebody asked, well, how old is Hattie Powell going to be when she gets married? And the question comes back as that she will get married in 4.5 years, which is interesting, like 4.5, how did they get 4.5 from a table moving? So I don't know, did the table move 4 times? And then there was like a short movement that didn't quite count and they didn't know what to do with that. And so it was 4.5. I don't know how they got a half. But so she says, okay, it's going to be 4.5 years before I get married. And so she tells her sister, ask Pa if he would not be satisfied with that. I shall be 24 years old. it's really interesting. Charles Powell does not want his daughters getting married young, before they're at the age of 24. And that's come up before in the letters, where they'll have a boyfriend or somebody that's a suitor, and Charles, their father, will say, he better not be your one and only bright and shining star, which is about as cheesy of a way to put that as possible. But every time he's like, you better not, like, not yet, you're not. And so Hattie, and I like how she tells him I should be 24. So I'm worried, like, is she concerned her dad doesn't know how old she is right now? Is she concerned he can't do the math? But she says, I'll be married in 4.5 years, and at that point I'll be 24. And ask dad if that'll be okay. So it's interesting that the two examples that she gives us, the answers are in number form, but I'm confident that they were playing this much broader, because she says, I've never laughed so hard in my life. So they definitely played this game for a while, and we're having a hilarious, as somber as a seance, I suppose, is, they're having a ball and a lot of different questions. And I suspect she shared these two examples, one, because she's drinking the Kool-Aid on this, and she absolutely believes that the spirits are moving this table. Or something's happening that she's struggling to explain. And she shares the first one about the tumblers on the table, on the sideboard. She's trying to prove to her sister, like, see, there were 12 on the sideboard. And then with this one, she probably thinks it's fun because, I'm going to be married by the time I'm 24 and a half, I guess. But she goes to the reactions of the different people in the room. One was, she says, I just wish you could have seen the expressions of Miss Lucy's face. So I don't think, in the beginning I thought, well, maybe Miss Lucy, like Aunt Lucy, is the one who's concocted this. She's probably fun, Aunt Lucy, but no, if she's a really good actress, that would be the first possibility, or she's genuinely reacting in shock when the table moves, which is another way that we know that this is table moving. That's how they're getting the answers, is through the movement. So I wish you could have seen the expressions on Miss Lucy's face when the table first began to move, and Peter's too, the servant. So Peter's, she puts the servant in parentheses out to the side to be clear. So he would be a man that is enslaved by Dr. Joseph Glass Gray. And on the slave schedule for 1860, he enslaves quite a number of people, as you would, if having an estate the size of Llangollen would require a lot of labor. And there were two men that were 65 years old and one that's 63 years old. And it's intriguing to think Peters might have been one of those. If he's operating in a capacity of a butler or a footman, might have been an older gentleman. And Peters is really interesting. I suspect that that's his surname, because Peters comes up a lot in my research of the enslaved families in southern Loudoun County and even northern Fauquier County. It's really fascinating. There's collections of, there's married couples and children all bearing the name Peters that are clearly related in the context of them being described. And then that name appears regularly throughout the area. So I think there was a large extended family of aunts and uncles and cousins. And it's intriguing to hear that name again here at Llangollen. Fascinating. Although apparently he's surprised. So I wonder if he's pretending, because if he's a 63, 65-year-old man who's enslaved, I doubt very much surprises him anymore at this point. So maybe he's doing a little acting because he's over there thinking, I don't know what you all are up to. So she says it was all very astonishing and satisfactory, but not more wonderful than mesmerism. So she's separating mesmerism from this, like mesmerism is better, but she does lump it in to this. And they do tend to do that when they talk about mesmerism in their letters. They will also use the word clairvoyance. They'll use magnetism and electricity. So this is where she says, I never laughed so much in my life, because I'm very well satisfied that it is electricity, and that the ones with the strongest wills are the ones who control it. So even though earlier she's drinking the Kool-Aid and emphasizing that all the questions were answered when they didn't know and nobody knew how many tumblers were on the sideboard, she maybe is hedging her bet here a little bit, because Rebecca, her older sister, is pretty smart and is very no nonsense. And so she may be hedging, like, yeah, but it's probably electricity. And I looked into, well, what did they know at this time? And there was this theory that a theory in the 19th century that the human body could produce electricity, that if you understood it well enough, you could move an inanimate object with some electricity emanating from your body. And so I think that's what she means with this, that yes, all their hands are on the table and they're probably moving it like people do in a Ouija board. But so that therefore those who have the strongest wills are the ones who are going to be able to control the movement of this table. But she emphasized, I've never seen that our question was answered when no one in the room knew the answer to it. And she doesn't elaborate any more on it. I wish she had, but she was running out of room on her paper. And so Travis said, this is okay. I did.
Sure, yeah.
So I'm going to hold this up. And this may look like a mess, but these are my favorite form of the Powell letters. So this is a crossed letter, which I know historians are used to seeing, but people who aren't used to doing this type of research may not be used to seeing this. So this looks almost like maybe the ink bled through from the, maybe if she wrote on the back, but it hasn't. I mean, the paper was good quality. So what she's done is she's written cross, like, you know, like on the paper in the regular direction, but she's done this for 4 pages, because this would have been a really large piece of paper that she would have written down the front, like picture a birthday card, and you open it up and she would have written down both sides, closed the back, written down the back. All of the Powell letters are like this. But she runs out of room. And then like the way she starts this story is she says, oh, I forgot to tell you of the table movings we had last night. So what she had to do was turn the page. And so she's written across it this way. And so this is the same side of the same piece of paper. This is called crossing a letter. And the way that they would say this in a sentence, they would say, write me a long letter and don't hesitate to cross it. Or, you know, I want to hear from you, and even if you have to cross the letter, that's okay. Like, definitely don't hesitate to cross the letter. So they love getting these in the night. This was not annoying in the 19th century, because this meant, like, Hattie had such good stories to tell, she ran out of paper and she had to cross it. And there's this myth that exists that this happened during the Civil War because paper had gotten very expensive and the postage was expensive, which, yes, that was true. But this letter is dated 1853, and an enormous percentage of the Powell papers are like this long before the war, when they had plenty of money to buy as much paper as they wanted. So I think crossing the letter had more to do with the logistics of the paper itself. If she was going to have to keep writing, she would have had to use a whole nother large sheet and fold that in half and potentially fill it, or she was going to have to cut it up. And then it's also got to fit in that tiny envelope.
Right.
And only so much paper is going to fit in that envelope. And some people made their own envelopes, but they did tend to be of a standard size. Like, I've not seen a big one. They're all like the size of a large business card. They're so little. So you're not going to be able to get that much paper in there. So my opinion is that this has more to do with the logistics of it. I do have a picture of her. That is Hattie Powell. And the Virginia Museum of History and Culture had it. And it is a bananas story how they ended up having this, because this is the only one of the Powell images that they have. So there are no other images of Powell's there that are the originals. There's some photographs of paintings that they don't own the copyrights to. But that one, the Virginia Museum of History and Culture does have. So that's who our letter writer is. She's a beauty. Beauty.
Well, you know, I always love talking to you, because I always learn so much about local families and what's going on in the 19th century. Just for our viewers who might not be as familiar with you, you're an independent historian, and you research the Powell family, obviously. How did you get interested in the Powells? What's the story behind your research?
So I was living in Dallas at the time, so I'm the least likely person to do this, and I'm a CPA. I still have a CPA license in the state of Virginia and in the state of Texas. And I was an audit senior manager with a Big 4 public accounting firm. So I did audits of large publicly traded companies for a living. And when I was in Dallas, I was looking for a way to participate in the sesquicentennial. So I'd moved there in mid-2010. And William & Mary put its entire Civil War archive online as a part of the sesquicentennial, and the Civil Rights Archive online as a part of the 50th anniversary of the Civil Rights Movement. And they were looking for volunteers to transcribe the papers. And I'd had a tragedy happen in my family and was new in town and didn't have a lot of friends yet to be out socializing. So I needed something to do at nights and on weekends when I was at home. It was just easier to be home in the worst part of the grief. So this project landed in my lap, and I went to this event to learn about it. And I thought, oh, transcribing old letters from my couch, I can do that. And that sounds like an impactful way to participate in the sesquicentennial that might be more reflective of the 21st century than a 20th century way to participate. And so I went home and started typing up maybe 1 letter a week on a Saturday over some coffee. Like, I didn't go for the gold on this, but eventually I landed on a letter by Hattie Powell and was just amazed, because during the Civil War, the Powells had been running a girls' boarding school in Winchester, which is so they moved back to Virginia from Illinois, and managed to open a school in Winchester pre-war, which is just, it's like they're time travelers but are bad at it. Like, why would, like, picking Winchester is just not where anybody should have been opening a school in 1856, but they did. They lost the school. When Stonewall Jackson pulled his army out, they fled, and they got all those girls home, and they fled themselves, and no two of the Powells stayed together for the duration of the war. And so Hattie Powell was going through a lot of grief. Two of their brothers were killed in battle, and she lost her home and all of her belongings, and she's going through this among strangers. So in that respect, her life mirrored mine a little bit, and she was going through a terrible thing all by herself without a support system, and I understood that, and she understood that. And so it was compelling to read what she had to say about that. Plus, once I learned her handwriting, it felt like this is just going to be easier if I just do one person's handwriting. And then also I was going to learn the fuller context. Like, her tale was compelling. She's at this house all by herself, living with strangers, teaching. And I thought, how did that happen to a single woman, and why is her family separated? That was probably a longer answer than you were looking for, but it was through a Civil War transcription project while I was cooped up.
That's perfect. And since then, it really seems like your project has just kind of mushroomed in a lot of different directions, because I know I've seen the binders that you have on all of these people.
So related to Langolan, so one of the genesis of where my hobby crossed a threshold to become a more full endeavor was I found the home where Hattie Powell lived during the war. And her letters from that home leave behind a pretty thorough account of life at that house. And so I thought, well, the homeowners may want to know that house was still standing. And of course they did. And they had me out for dinner. And so I made them a binder of all the letters with William and Mary's permission, my copies of the transcriptions for them to have. And then it started to snowball from there. I wanted to find other homes where she was during the war. And then ultimately, the Mosby Heritage Area, put me in touch with the owner of Langolan. And because there were a lot of letters written from Langolan, particularly this is one where she gets very nostalgic, and she describes the property in detail as she's walking it and visiting all of her old favorite haunts. And of course the owner was interested in that and was very kind and had me out to let me see the property so I could match up, so I could see what it is that she was seeing. So I made him a binder of all of those letters, the transcriptions of those, to share with him too. And it's been fun to learn about these families in Loudoun County. One really interesting snippet that's hard to leave out, this woman, Lute, she's 18 years old out at Langolan, and she's lost her mother, and she's 18, so she's a teenager. Well, she's got this aunt visiting, this Aunt Lucy Elsie. Lucy Elsie lost her mother when she was a teenager. So I'm gonna have to use my hands to try to describe this. So Lucy Elsie is the aunt, so she's up here. When her mother died, and she had an aunt, Sally Elsie, left her home and her estate, her money. So we had a Sally Elsie, aunt number one, who left her property to her niece named Lucy when her mother, I guess maybe she had a heart for her because she lost her mother so young. Well, now we've got Miss Lucy is now in the role of aunt, the way that her aunt was. And she's got a little niece, Lute, who's 18 years old, who's lost her mother. She does the same thing. She leaves that house in Leesburg and her estate to Lucy Ellen Gray, who inherits that in, I believe, 1860. And then so that we have 3 generations of aunt to niece, where the 2 nieces both lost their mothers when they were teenagers. Really interesting history of that property. So I think it's the Elsie home that now is connected to the St. James Episcopal Church. That's the one. It is identified as an Elsie property. I can't get to vaults right now to make sure that that's the one. I can't see the deed. From Sally down to the older Lucy, down to the younger Lucy. The same property. But I believe that that's the house. Fascinating, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon, Alison. I always love it when we can take these bigger topics that we discuss in these programs and find a local connection like that. If people are interested in your research, is there a place they can go to learn more about what you've been working on?
Yep, I have a pretty good online presence. So I have a website, and it's my name, AlisonHerring.com. And if you just Google my name, it comes right up. I'm also on Twitter @HistoryHerring. So I tend to tweet more than I use Facebook, but I do also have a public Facebook page that's also History Herring. You can find me there on Facebook, Twitter, and my website.
All right, great. So we can follow along as you discover more about the Powells. Thank you so much. And thanks for sharing that story. And if anyone out there watching has questions for a historian, wants to know more about a particular topic, all you need to do is reach out to the Mosby Heritage Area Association, either on Facebook or at our website, mosbyheritagearea.org. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.